is Friday night. The local high school has just finished a football game, and the nearby KFC is hustling and bustling. The last few customers go ahead and leave, and they don't pay any attention to the three workers that are basically just ushering them out the door. But this is the last time these three workers would ever be seen alive. What happened to these KFC workers stumped the police for over 2 decades. Before we delve into today's story time, please note that today's video is going to contain graphic descriptions of violent crimes, and it might not be suitable for all viewers, and your viewer discretion is advised. If murder and rape and things of that nature make you uncomfortable, you can help yourself to one of the many other videos I have on my channel, but this video is not for you. Welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Jodessy, and welcome to episode 2 of Melanated Mysteries. For today's case, we're going to be in Kilgore, Texas, known as the City of Stars, but not because it's a big bustling city with bright lights or anything like that. Actually, the city had hundreds of oil rigs, and I guess they would shine in the light, and that's why they were sort of known for being the City of Stars. And you're gonna see in this case that an oil rig does come up. Despite its name being kind of creepy, Kilgore is going to be described as a small town. Everyone sort of knows each other back then in September 23rd, 1983. And they had a population of just around 10,000 at the time of this case. So it is Friday evening on September 23rd, and like I said, the local high school had just had a football game. So naturally, everyone sort of goes to KFC just to grab a late night dinner, and everything seemingly was going as normal that night. So there were three employees for the night. There were 3 employees for the night on that closing shift. Their names were Opie Hughes, Joey Johnson, and Mary Tyler. And unfortunately, those are the 3 names of our victims for today. Mary Tyler. Mary Tyler was 37 years old. She was an assistant manager at the KFC. And she'd worked for KFC for so long. She had actually worked at a different KFC in a different branch. And in that other KFC branch is where she actually met her husband. And her husband is named Billy Tyler. So they fell in love, and Mary was already a mom of 3 kids. And Billy actually had 2 kids of his own. And they became this beautiful family of 7 children. And it was just really spectacular for them. And it was said that Mary treated his children like her own, and that she was such a great wife and mother. Next, we have Opie Hughes. Now, Opie Hughes worked at the establishment as a packer. So I'm guessing she packed the bag, like the food, into the bags. I think she was 39 years old. And she was married to Jack Hughes, who was a truck driver. They had 2 or 3 kids, daughters. And I did read somewhere that one of her daughters and her had a fight, and that ended up being the very last time that the mom did end up speaking to the daughter. But her mom did tell her before she left that she loved her that day. She was also described as a devoted wife and mother. And then the last name for right now, it's going to be Joey Johnson. Now, Joey Johnson is going to be the youngest worker at this KFC at the time. He is a cook, and he is 20 years old. He's a sophomore in college, and this man, this little boy, this whatever, he is impressive, okay? So he's senior class president. He was senior class president. He had a strong work ethic. He actually idolized his father, who passed away when he was like younger. He was on 2 sports teams. He graduated with honors. He had a part-time job at the KFC. He had a girlfriend named Leanna, and he still had all this time to still like be in a fraternity and like have frat bros and things like that. So he had a very active academic life, very active social life. He was a very well-rounded kid. So all 3 of these workers ended up working this closing shift on that Friday night. And of course, they're doing the typical closing. So if you've ever worked a fast food restaurant, of course, at the end of the night, especially a busy night where you would have record sales, that restaurant probably looks nuts, right? So they would have to, like, of course, pack away the food. Newsflash, they do save the food. I don't know if they still do it, did it like that in the 80s, but they do like have some food items that they're allowed to save, and then everything else goes in the trash. Of course, you gotta count out money, do bank deposits, things like that. And then, of course, take out the trash, mop, sweep, get everything ready, fill out all the little condiment stations and things like that for the next day, and lock up the store and basically go home, right? So that is what all three of them are basically tasked with doing. We have Joey, Mary, and Ophi, and they're basically that closing crew. 10:45 p.m. that night, Kim Tyler is going to arrive at the restaurant, and her plan basically was to ask her money. Her plan basically was to ask her mother for money. So Kim Tyler also worked at this restaurant, and she had basically just started there. She's actually the daughter of the assistant manager, Mary Tyler, and she just got a job there. She was known as sort of like a troubled kid, so I guess Mary got her a job to sort of just help her out and help get her on the straight and narrow. So on this night, Kim wanted some money. So she wanted some money from her mother, and she wanted some money. So Kim wanted some money from her mother. She had some sort of plans with her friends. Some sources say like it was like a boyfriend. Other sources just say friends. And she shows up to the restaurant. It seems, some sources say that she showed up by herself, and some sources said she came with the friend. First thing she notices is her mom's car is in the parking lot. So she's like, oh yes, they are still here, perfect. I can go and ask my mother for some money, because I think she kind of just started, so like she didn't have like her own money. I don't think the first check hit, and you guys know, regardless who your mom is, the first check takes longer for everybody. Like, it takes so long to come. So she tries the front door, and she notices that like the front door is locked, and that is odd, right? So she peers through the glass, and she's just like, well, what's going on? And she notices that the restaurant seems empty, but obviously that doesn't make sense because she just saw her mother's car, and they're the cars also of the other two employees, Ophi and Joey. So she knows that somebody is there, right? So she goes around to the back. At this point in the story, it's unclear if she calls Billy her stepdad, or if Billy just, he had worked at a KFC, he realizes that his wife is taking long, and he's like, what's going on? And he just appears. But Billy does come to the KFC that night, and Mary and Billy enter the KFC together. Now, when they enter the KFC, they have to go around through the back door because, of course, the front door was locked, and that left them closer to, of course, the kitchen area. If you've ever been in a fast food restaurant, you know the front leads to the seating area. The back door is going to lead towards the kitchen area. And right when they get to that kitchen area, like that back door, they notice that there's like a bag of trash just sitting there, and the back door is pretty much like open. I'm not sure if it's wide open, but it is opened already. So they're walking through the restaurant, and they're realizing like, no, like this restaurant doesn't look like it's prepped for the next day. And at this point, they both know what the restaurant should look like for closing, and that is basically not the case. Okay, so what they notice is that the key is still in the door, which is very odd. They also notice that there are like KFC hats, like 2 KFC hats that have been strewn about. They also notice like just the food kind of being everywhere and things like that. But the main thing and the main concerning thing that they do notice is they do notice some blood, right? So they notice some blood, and right away it's like, wait, you guys notice blood? Like, that's the number one sign. Like, you have to call the police, right? However, the amount of blood that was there was not really, I don't want to say not that big of a deal, but it wasn't too crazy. So initially, the initial thought was like, okay, well, maybe Joey like hurt himself, because it's just like a little bit of blood. Like, you know, it's not like someone got stabbed or shot or whatever and there's a pool of blood. It's just like some dots and splashes of blood. So their initial theory was that somebody, basically maybe Joey, because he worked there as the cook. Basically Joey might have cut himself, and then in like the hubbubaloo, like they all rushed and went to the hospital. But like that theory doesn't really make sense, because they all have like 3 vehicles. I think it was 2 cars and a motorbike or something. They have their 3 modes of transportation sitting out in the parking lot. So that doesn't make sense. However, they weren't thinking that at the time. They were just thinking like, okay, well, clearly something has happened. We're not really sure what. And we're going to go ahead and get to the bottom of this. So Billy sends Mary, and her friend, I guess. That's the only time her friend really came up. He sends Mary and this friend of hers to the local hospital, because remember, small town, just to see if any workers had come in from KFC with an injury, because then, of course, that would help him find Mary, his wife. And there were no descriptions matching anybody. There was no KFC workers, nobody in a KFC uniform that had come to the hospital that night. So now they're really, really worried, right? Because of course they haven't seen Mary, Opie, or Joey, and they haven't turned up. Here's when they finally go ahead and they call the police. Police show up, and the police are looking. They're like, oh, maybe they'll just turn up. And then they realize, wait a second, these people aren't turning up. So when they realize that they aren't turning up, they then go ahead and contact the families of Opie and Joey to just let them know that they are looking for them and that they are missing. So some things that the police note at the crime scene are that the victims' time cards are still there. So they know that there are 3 victims, of course, that they all have 3 vehicles parked outside of the restaurant, seemingly abandoned, but like, how do you get anywhere without your vehicle? The cash register was completely empty. So this cash register, remember, it was just a busy Friday night, and the high school had just had a game, and so many people came in. So this cash register would have been packed, but they noticed that it was empty, and that of course pointed them to the fact that it might be a robbery. There was also a dent in the wall right by the cash register, like right next to it, which could have indicated, and it was a sizable dent, like about the size of like a human head. So it could have like indicated like somebody's head being shoved into the wall, somebody's head being bashed during some sort of attack. So right away the police are like, okay, well, this is an issue and these people are actually missing. Start their investigation, and they start like, you know, taking pictures of the crime scene, and they take about 10 rolls of photos at the crime scene. And while this is going on, they receive a phone call, and it lets them know that they're not 3 missing people. There are actually 5 missing people. They get a phone call from 18-year-old Lana Maxwell, and Lana Maxwell is pregnant with her first child, and she's looking for her husband, David Maxwell. So David had gone to the KFC that night because he shares a motorcycle with Joey. It's Joey's motorcycle. However, David is close friends with Joey. They're fraternity brothers, and David had lost his car keys, so he has been using Joey's bike. And that day he realized, like, oh wait, Joey has to go to work, he's going to need his key, he's going to need his bike to get home, so let me go ahead and just drop off this, let me just go ahead and drop off the bike to him. And then I think that they had plans to go to a party after. Now, also in the store that day would have been their friend Monty. They also had plans to basically hang out with, and it's thought that David and Monty basically they went to the store and they were just gonna basically help Joey close up just to get him out of work a little faster, like, you know, like good friends who want to party. So they just wanted to like help him finish up his chores faster, because remember, Joey is a very responsible person, so he wasn't gonna leave everything half done to just go hang out with his friends. He's not that type of kid. Our missing toll, we have 5 people missing. We have David Maxwell, who's 20 years old. We have Joey Johnson, also 20 years old. They're frat bros. We have Monty Landers, who's 19 years old, also a frat brother of the 3. Then we have Mary Tyler, who's the assistant manager, 37. It is her husband and her daughter who made the discovery that she was missing and that this whole thing happened in the first place. And then we have Opie Hughes, who is 39 years old. So they begin their search, they begin their collection of evidence, and they realize that there's not that, like, there are no fingerprints, there's really nothing and no real clues, and that basically points to the fact that it might have been premeditated, and whoever came in to commit this robbery like had planned to do so, and it wasn't like just a last minute plan, right? So they're going to search all through the night and they are not going to find anything. The Texas Rangers even were called in to get involved because the Kilmore Police Station and Kilmore Police Force, they're a very small police they're a very small police force because of course it's a small town. So they called in the Texas Rangers because they need help with this case. So despite their best efforts and them basically searching all night for these missing 5 people, they basically get nothing. And they don't find anything until the next morning. And the next morning, it's a pretty gruesome sight that's found. So 12 miles away from the restaurant, there's going to be an oil rig worker, and his name is Arthur Warwick, and he spots piles of something laying in a field. So his immediate thought is that it is like piles of trash or piles of clothes. And he's like, okay, well, let me go pick that up. He gets a little closer because he's a few yards away, and he sees that, okay, these are not like piles of clothes, these are like people. So he still doesn't think anything of it, which for me, and I guess you or like anyone else, piles of people would have been like a scary thing. But what he thought was happening was that that there were neighborhood kids, because sometimes neighborhood kids would like to like get their cars, go party in the field, etc, xyz. So he thought that that's basically what happened. Like these were just some drunken kids that fell asleep on the field and they're basically sleeping off hangovers. So as he approaches, he starts yelling at them like, all right kids, time to go, like come on, pack it on up, I got work to do, let's go, y'all gotta go, right? And he's yelling at them, but they're not moving. And he realizes that like they're not moving, they're not responding, right? He's like letting them know they gotta go, and he's getting closer and closer. And he realizes when he gets there that these are 4 bodies, and all 4 of these people, there are 3 boys and a girl. So it's all 3 of the boys and Mary are face down like this in the dirt, and they have bullet wounds and they have been shot execution style, all basically laying side by side in a line, and all their pockets have been like turned inside out and they're not wearing jewelry. So right away he's like, okay, something crazy is going on, and he calls the police, right? So they have just located 4 of the victims, and the only person missing at this point is Ophi Hughes, but she's going to be found relatively quickly because she's just a few yards away. She's about 40 yards away from the others. She's in a completely different position, and she seemed to like still be like gripping grass and her hair, and like it's theorized like right away like, okay, well, she clearly, the other one seemed to have been compliant, and maybe Opie tried to make a run for it, and that's why she's all the way over here while the others were over there. They conduct their investigation, and police ballistics are going to reveal that there are 2 different guns in this case. There's a .38 and a .357. And upon, I guess, the ballisticking, they realized that 7 bullets came from the .38. But a .38 only holds 6 bullets. So they were like, okay, so either this person, like, stopped in the middle of everything and, like, reloaded their gun, or maybe there are, like, 2 .38s, like, 2 people that have .38s, and 1 person with this .357. So that leads them in the direction that we might be looking for 3 different perpetrators. Now, the biggest fumble for this case is that the police, they didn't secure either crime scene until like that next morning, right? So once they find the bodies, then they start securing the crime scene, but then they also went to go secure the KFC, and they hadn't secured it. So like basically the crime scene, like there was an opportunity to say that the crime scene was tampered with or contaminated because it wasn't secured. How they handled this case was really, really weird. So of course, Kilgore is a small town, so they needed a lot of help, and they had like Russ County handling the murders, and then Gregg County and Kilmore, they took the robbery and the kidnapping, and then Smith County like was assisting, and then the Texas Rangers basically had to come in and help because all these different counties were like basically not getting along with their investigations, and there was like no communication, and it was just really just a recipe for disaster. They were also kind of like underfunded, so they didn't have a lot of money, and they had, of course, 10 rolls of film that they had taken at the KFC at the time of the murders, well, on September 23rd. They had taken 10 rolls of film, basically crime scene photos, but I'm not sure why they didn't develop them. They didn't have money, or maybe they didn't have the resources to develop so many pictures. So they basically tried to do like a DIY sort of situation and develop these pictures on their own. However, the DIY situation failed miserably, and 9 out of the 10 rolls of photos were gone. Like, just, that's 90% of all the crime scene photos were just destroyed by accident because they were trying to develop it. A part of these pictures that did get destroyed were the pictures of like the bloody napkin that they had found, and the cash register's tape box, the cash register's tape that also had blood on them. And if you watch any of these crime scene shows, you know that they want pictures of these things in the actual locations just to prove that they came from those locations, and to prove basically like chain of custody and like where things originated from and where exactly was it in the restaurant. And just pictures of a crime scene, they're just helpful, especially during this time. It's 1983, and they don't have CCTV footage, right? So now you think of like all KFCs, all McDonald's, whatever, like people have smartphones, there's phones everywhere, and you would think that if something happens, it's relatively easier to get it on film, or somebody got it on film, but nobody got it on film. There were no cameras in or outside of this restaurant. So they had collected some things at the crime scene. They had collected, of course, the tape blocks and the napkins, and they did have blood on them, and they did suspect that the blood might be from the perpetrators, especially if, like, there was a scuffle, especially if they were trying to fight back. That, like, you know, maybe they did get some of the killer's blood on some of these items. However, it's the 80s, so there's like less DNA technology available. So I don't want to say that the DNA was useless, but it wasn't that helpful at the time. When they took off Joey Johnson's like outfit, they saw that he had a torn fingernail in like the waist of his pants. And they also noted that Joey, even though all the other victims had been shot twice while they were laying down, Joey was shot 3 times. So basically the working theory here was that Joey must have been trying to fight back, and maybe this fingernail like belonged to the killer, right? So like this fingernail is going to be a big lead, and it's basically what they're going to base their case off of, because of course they don't have, like, they can't like really test the blood. So the police go on investigating this crime and investigating what has been going on, and they catch wind of somebody in the neighborhood basically threatening people, letting them know and telling them like, oh, you don't want to mess with me? You want to end up like those 5 people at the KFC? You want to end up like the Kentucky 5? Huh? So, of course, they have to bring this person in, because that sounds like a confession, or at least it sounds like you're a person of interest and you know something that is going on in this case, because why else would you be threatening, like, oh, you want to end up like them? Like, what do you mean? How would you make somebody end up like them if you have nothing to do with the situation, right? So they bring in their first suspect, and their first suspect is James Earl Minkins Jr., and he is the son of a senior state representative. His father is like super respected, and that's also like sidebar why I'm like, I'd be terrified as a man to name my son a junior, because like, what if they're really out here embarrassing you like this? Like, you're a state representative and your son is known to the police. He is like just sort of a bad apple, bad egg. He is a drug dealer. He is violent. He threatens people. He's just basically a bad character, bad apple, and the police know of him, so they bring him in. He's very familiar. Upon speaking to Junior, they realize that his fingernail was missing. One of his fingernails on his right hand, and it looks like he had some sort of injury on that hand. So right away they're like, we got a fingernail, like, you know? So they want to see if the fingernails match. Of course, James, he denied having any involvement with the KFC 5. But they wanted to like take pictures of his fingernails, and they actually ended up taking like a whole, like a mold, a cast of his fingernails, which I thought was like a little odd, but whatever. Like, they took a whole cast of his finger, because they wanted to basically see if the pieces of the fingernail match his broken off fingernail. And remember, the fingernail is like the only real evidence they have in this case, despite the blood DNA evidence, but they haven't like been able to process or do anything with that yet. Apparently on September 23rd, James had already been to jail that day. He'd already been to jail. He had just gotten out of jail for a gun charge. And that was the day of like the killing on September 23rd. And he had basically, right when he left jail, he went to a friend's house and he borrowed a gun. And the gun happened to be a 38, which is the same gun from the killings, right? Remember we said like there were 7 rounds shot out of a 38. So it happens to be the same gun from the killings, and then the next day he like returns the gun, like, because he doesn't need the gun anymore, which is just like real weird, right? Like, it was really weird because you just happen to borrow this gun, the same gun that's used in the killing, later that day, and then you return the gun to your friend the very next day. So needless to say, the police are policing. They go ahead and they take this gun into evidence, and they run a ballistics report. And basically, I think the ballistic reports are basically just run by like firing similar types of guns to see. Because at first I was like, how are you doing ballistic reports but you ain't doing DNA, like DNA tests? Like, you know, like I thought they were both kind of like high science, but I guess like not. So they did the ballistics report, and they couldn't prove that it was that gun. Like, so I'm not sure if it came like back as inconclusive or like whatever, but basically they couldn't prove definitively, and like the ballistic reports didn't help. So the friend is off. He's pretty much off, and at this time they're like, the town is talking. Like 5 people are killed. These are 5 people that like the community knew, the town knew. So of course everyone is talking about what happened to these 5 kids, right? Well, for these 5 people, and these 3 kids, because they're in the early 19s, 20s, you know, these 3 boys, and this starts a series of rumors. So some of the rumors that were started were basically that this was like a drug related thing. There was like a secret recipe for like the best meth ever in the safe at the KFC. Like, this is just a weird theory, but there's a recipe for the best meth ever in the safe in the KFC, and that like James went after it, or like, and then that like there were also staff that were like allegedly selling like meth and drugs through the drive-through, and that's what they were after. Like, that's whatever like the robbers were after, or James, if it was James, that's what he would be after. And those, like, that just seems a little far-fetched to me. I, of course, have never made meth. So I didn't realize it was something that, like, you would need a recipe for. Well, they spoke to the store manager, and the store manager, not Mary, because she was the assistant manager. They spoke to the actual store manager, and she was like, yeah, no, that is far-fetched. Like, Joey's a great kid. These were, like, great kids. I think, David also worked at the KFC. I'm not sure. Some places said he did. Some places says he didn't. But she assures them that like Joey, Mary, Opie, they're all great people. Like, they're not involved in none of the nonsense, which I didn't expect them to be involved in any of the nonsense, because what the heck? Like, that's just real random. Witness is going to come forward. So the witness comes forward, and she says that she was at the KFC earlier that night around 9 o'clock. Her and her man basically went to go get KFC, and as they pulled up, they saw a white van. The white van was sort of like, it was just a regular van, but it just kind of stuck out because it wasn't like in a parking spot. It was just kind of like pulled over in the back of the KFC. And they get online and they order their food. And basically, while they were ordering their food, they overhear a conversation. The worker is basically letting somebody know that they had missed their bank deposit for that day, and that they had like $2,000 in the store still. So like that they would need to like basically make a bank deposit later that night, because like they got all this money and they got to deposit it. She says that this worker wasn't whispering, and that like it was easy for her to overhear, And it was like clear that the people behind her had heard as well. So the people behind her are going to be two black men, tall, young in their 20s, and this description leads them to two additional suspects, Darnell Hartsfield and Romeo Pinkerton. So she says that they overheard this conversation, and they basically were like, I guess, eavesdropping on the conversation, but that the worker wasn't making it hard to eavesdrop because I guess they were just talking in their normal voice, even though they're talking about a lot of money. Because remember, this is the 80s, so like $2,000 is a lot now, right? And $2,000 in the 80s is the equivalent of $7,623 today. So that is a good chunk of change that this worker is just speaking about having in the store. And according to this witness, she's not like being discreet about this amount of money. She's just like kind of saying it matter-of-factly. So upon investigation, it turns out that the worker in question was Kim. Remember, Kim had just started working there, and she was actually on the phone with Mary, her mother. So Mary hadn't come to the store, to the shop, until later, and apparently she had come to the shop just to do that deposit because they had such a large amount of money in the store. Kim is probably like, what? When she hears this, because basically, like, it's like the witness basically comes forward and was like, oh yeah, this happened and it's totally Kim's fault. Like, that's insane. Anyway, she says that her and her man left, and that when they left, they noticed that the white van was still there, and they left like closer to closing. So I guess they ate there. So they go ahead and they're looking for these two men. They're looking for Romeo and Darnell. So Darnell had actually robbed a convenience store a few days later after the KFC robbery. And, well, robbery and murder and everything else. He had actually robbed a convenience store after, and it like fit sort of like the same MO, but like where he threatened the workers and whatever, but he didn't kidnap anyone. So the police were looking for him already, but they end up finding Romeo first. Romeo tells them that he was in jail at the time of the thing. So he's like, yeah, I was in jail and I didn't get out of jail until like a few days after this thing happened. So like, I clearly, like, that's his alibi. Like, I clearly didn't do anything. Like, they realize like, okay, well, he can't be my guy because he was locked up at the time, right? So he's good. So they go ahead and they rule him out as a suspect, right? So then they find Darnell. Darnell denies it. And he passes a polygraph test, apparently. And he passes that polygraph test. Darnell and Romeo are actually cousins, so they ruled out one cousin. They were like, all right, well, we was thinking y'all did it together, but clearly his alibi is out. You just passed the polygraph test. So, yeah, I guess it's not you guys. They have nothing at this point. Police have nothing. So they start basically begging the public for help with this case, and they get a bunch of leads, and they all sort of lead to nothing, right? So they get a bunch of leads, a bunch of like different things, and people, they said they saw things, white vans. I saw a driver of a white van, it was a white man. I saw this, I saw that. And all of this basically leads to absolutely nothing. Because there's a lack of evidence, the case just goes cold, and that had to be devastating for the families of all the victims involved, because like when a case goes cold, it's that the police are not actively investigating the death of your loved one anymore, and that is probably so terrible. So the family of the victims, they basically beg the police, like, you need to reopen this case. You need to reopen this case. Right? You have to reopen it. And the police do reopen it. It takes them 10 years to reopen it. So now that it has been 10 years, of course, we're in 1993, and they have made some advancements when it comes to DNA evidence. So of course they had the bloody stuff, the bloody tape box, the bloody napkins from the scene. They had that, but they hadn't been able to do anything with it prior to 1993 because they didn't have the ability to DNA test. So using the DNA tech, they ruled that the fingernail was consistent with the mold that they had made of James' finger back in the day. Good thing they made a mold because, like, this is 10 years later. But they realized that it's not an exact, like, it's not an exact match, but it's like a pretty close match. And they go ahead and they move forward and they charge James with the murder of the KFC 5. Pleads not guilty. So they're trying to go through their evidence and they're realizing, like, yo, we don't have evidence. Like, their case, they're realizing exactly how weak their case is. They're going to send the fingernail clipping that they have from Joey's pant leg over to, like, a better facility. One that is, like, really high tech and really does DNA evidence, basically to, like, strengthen the case because their whole case is riding on this fingernail. But when they do send this fingernail over to the case, it completely ruins their case because the DNA comes back and they're not a match. Like, that is not this man's fingernail. So of course they have had this, like, of course they dropped these charges and the case goes nowhere because that was their only, like, piece of evidence to connect him to this crime. They let him go, but he was on trial and, like, I guess awaiting the trial for 6 months. So he was in jail for 6 months facing a possible death row, like, sentence for, in his words, something that he did not do. This gets the rumor mill buzzing even more. So the rumors now are that, like, oh no, James totally did do it. But remember, I said that his father is, like, a really important guy. So the rumor is that his father, like, basically pulled some strings to make sure that the DNA evidence doesn't match, to basically get his son off. And he called in some favors because, like, they're just, like, really, really convinced that, like, this kid did it. Extremely frustrating for the families because the case has gone cold again. Their only suspect is gone. Once again, the families are devastated. They're left without answers, and this case stays closed until 2001. So in 2001, of course, they have even better DNA, and the families beg to get the case reopened, and finally, the case does get reopened. So there's a new team, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to take the tape box and the napkin, and they're going to test it again. And they do get a breakthrough. So remember in my last case that I spoke about CODIS, and that's basically the DNA system where felons, they have to register their DNA upon arrest. They actually get a match in CODIS to Darnell. So if you remember, Darnell Hartsfield was one of those original suspects, and he had been basically, like, taken off. That they just, like, he was looked at immediately because he matched the victim's, he matched the witness's description, but they basically ruled him out. But now he has DNA placing him at the scene that he said he wasn't there. He said he wasn't at that scene, but he has DNA placing him at the scene. Also a match to the napkin. So the match to the napkin was Romeo. Romeo, Mr. I'm in jail. I was in jail. I couldn't have been there because I was locked up. Huh? So it turns out that he was not in prison. He actually had gotten out of prison, like, a few days before the KFC thing, not after the KFC thing, which is, like, nuts to me, because how do you lie to the police and tell them that you were, or, like, you were in jail and, like, nobody checked? Like, nobody followed up and checked that you were actually in jail. Like, that should have been, like, the easiest alibi to check. Like, you know, there's no way he should have been able to get away with that alibi. Like, I was in jail. It should have been a simple phone call. But apparently, because like there was a hurricane at the time or something, like nobody checked the alibi, and nobody like checked to see if like he was actually in jail, and they just kind of took his word for it and like decided like, okay, well then you couldn't have done it because you said that you were in jail, even though you were not in jail. At the time when Opie's body was found, Opie was not wearing any underwear, but she did have pants on. And they realized that there was some discoloration on the crotch of her pants that just kind of seemed a little odd. So they went ahead and they sent that for DNA testing too. And Opie's pants had semen in them. And that semen didn't match her husband or any of the other victims or anyone in CODIS. So it didn't match Romeo. It didn't match Darnell. It doesn't match her husband. And that is like, oh my God. There's a third guy here. And if you guys remember, Opie's body was found 40 yards away from where everybody else was. So now it makes sense that like she wasn't, or maybe she did try to fight back, but she wasn't like fighting back that way. This person fought her over 40 yards away for like, I guess, privacy to rape her. And this DNA match was not a match to Romeo or Darnell, but it did ping as being a third African American assailant, an unknown assailant. No matches in CODIS, still no matches to this day. Who the heck is this third guy? And that officially basically takes James off the suspect list, because we're looking for 3 suspects. We have 2 suspects, and the third one is black and James is not. So it basically just goes ahead and takes James right off that suspect list. So on November 5th of 2001, we have that Darnell and Romeo are charged with not only murder, but with the murder of the 5, they're also charged with perjury, because they were under oath when they swore that they were not, like they hadn't done it, and they weren't they were under oath when they swore that they had nothing to do with the murders. And of course now DNA, and that they hadn't been to the KFC, and now the DNA is proving that they were lying, which I thought was kind of weird, because like, isn't that like how every murder trial happens? Like the person's like, oh, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, and then the cops prove you did. But this is the first time I'm hearing about a perjury charge being attached to that. So it seems like only Darnell caught the perjury charge, because he had done the lie detector test. So because he had fooled, I guess, the lie detector test, they gave him a perjury charge. And because he had like such a long rap sheet already, they decided to, like, his sentence was life in prison for the perjury charge. So he's already in prison for life. And I, like, right away, this doesn't even sound right to me. Like, you're in jail. Like, I understand lying to the authorities is bad, but like, a whole life sentence off of just perjury doesn't make any sense, unless I think like 2 theories. You're just doing this because he's black, because in what world is a perjury charge, not saying that he needs to be out and he should have been free or whatever, but in what world is a damn perjury charge a whole life in prison for lying? Life in prison for a perjury charge. It doesn't make sense, right? So it's giving like, okay, is it because he's black that y'all are doing this? Or my other theory is that like they weren't sure if they were gonna get him on the murders, so they were like, all right, listen, this case been cold long enough. At least if we don't get him on the murders, this man will be in jail forever anyway, so it doesn't matter. but he's basically gonna go into the trial for the 5 victims already with a life in prison sentence because of the perjury. It's like a weird little anecdotal story that I don't know where it fits in, and I don't know how true it is. Apparently in 2003, they asked or requested the sample from Darnell for his DNA, and he refused to provide a sample. And I guess that's like his right to refuse, or anybody's right to refuse to provide a DNA sample. So they went and they tried, like, you know, their little usual tricks, offering him water, offering him things, and nothing worked. And he basically decides, Darnell, that he is so adamant about not giving his DNA that he's going to write a letter to them and basically tell them, like, yo, KMA, like, you're not getting my DNA out of me, buddy. Like, it's my right. You ain't getting no DNA out of me. Sucks to suck, basically, you know. But then he, like, apparently licked the envelope shut and sent it to them. So they had his they had a nice current DNA sample from him because he didn't think that one through at all. So Romeo is also arrested. He pleads not guilty originally, and then as the case goes on and he's seeing, like, the evidence against him, he changes his plea to guilty, but he's adamant that he didn't change his plea to guilty because he was actually guilty. He changed his plea to guilty apparently to avoid the death penalty because he was scared of the death penalty. And he denies ever having part in the murder. And he says that the DNA was planted and that he was set up by racist cops in order to protect James. And you remember, this goes back to James' father being this well-connected man. So everybody's like, y'all are just protecting James. So Darnell also pleads not guilty. And he decides that he's going to testify for himself, and that basically leads him with, like, life in prison. And his defense strategy, actually, they try to blame Kim. And you guys remember, Kim is Mary Tyler's daughter, the one that had the phone call about the $2,000 deposit. Their defense strategy was to blame Kim because Kim was a little rough around the edges. Remember, she's only 17, but, like, she had, like, apparently, like, just come home from, like, one of those schools that you send your kids to when they're bad and things like that. And, like, she was, like, rough around the edges. So the defense basically argued that it must have been Kim because Kim had a history of stealing, and Kim did have a history of stealing, and that Kim might have got a group of friends, like, you know, because Kim was, like, the first person on the scene. She's the first witness. That's super suspicious. We know that Kim had, like, knowledge that there were $2,000 on the scene that, you know, that didn't get deposited. That did not work, thank God. So he was given 5 life sentences, 1 for each of the victims. And upon sentencing, Opie's husband, like, begged him to give up the name of this third guy. Because remember, this third guy still hasn't been found. Currently in 2024, this third guy still hasn't been found. In 2007, Pinkerton pleaded guilty and he was convicted. And in 2008, Hartsfield was also convicted, and they were both given those 5 life sentences. And they have applied for parole, and they were denied. And Darnell, actually, he dies in May of 2022. And to this day, Romeo is going to deny having any involvement, which of course means he is not giving up that third suspect. He's not giving up that third person that was involved in this horrific murder. So just some of my, like, final thoughts on the case, and these were, like, sort of my what the hell moments. Number 1, not securing the crime scene immediately. What? Why wouldn't you secure the crime scene immediately? Number 2, the fingernail. They finally, like, figured out whose fingernail was it, and it was Mary's fingernail, like one of the other victims' fingernails. So they had they had her, and they saw that she had a missing fingernail and that Joey had a fingernail in his pants, but they didn't connect that was the fingernail, and they basically went for 10 years off of this fingernail that is the victim's fingernail being their only evidence for this case. Like, that is nuts. The not checking of alibis leaves me floored, because how on earth does one say that they were in jail and they weren't in jail and the police don't catch that? Like, I understand if you're lying to a regular civilian, but I'm pretty sure the police know who's in jail and who's not in jail. Like, what the heck? And then my heart just goes out to Kim. Like, she has to feel terrible. Like, there's no way. Like, okay, you're trying to get back. Like, you were a troubled kid. You had a history of, like, stealing. Yeah. You're trying to do the right thing. You get a job, which you're working with your mom. You get a job working with your mom, and you're trying to basically do the right thing. You're trying to be a good kid, and you're trying to basically do good at this new job. And you make a phone call to the system manager, and you weren't as discreet as you should have been. Honest mistake. Well, a mistake. This witness comes through, like, your mom died. Your mom literally died. And this witness comes forward, and they're like, yeah, we have a break in the case. Years later, and the break in the case is that your conversation was overheard, and it basically is blaming you. Like, that's nuts. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. That brings us to the end of our case. We're just going to take a quick moment to remember the victims of this case. And those victims would be David Maxwell, 20 years old, Joey Johnson, 20 years old, Monty Landers, 19 years old, Mary Tyler, 37 years old, and Opie Hughes, 39 years old. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video, or if you have any comments on the case. Like, what were your moments where you're just like, what the heck is going on with this case? As well as you have any other cases that you want me to look into, you can go ahead and comment those cases below, and comment any of your thoughts and opinions down below. I definitely look forward to reading them and seeing like what you guys think of these cases. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you guys see me in the next one.